My name is Mia. I'm 28 years old. I've spent most of my life trying to survive in a world that doesn't care much for people like me. Born into a broken family in Thailand, I was taught early that life wasn't fair. My mother left when I was just a baby, and my father was too lost in his addiction to see me, let alone love me. The streets of Bangkok raised me, like they raised so many others, showing me only hardship and pain. I learned to adapt, to survive, to make it through every single day, no matter what it took. At 16, I ended up on the streets, and I wasn't alone. I was one of the many young girls who were trapped by circumstance, by poverty, by hopelessness, and by the lack of options that life seemed to give people like me. It didn't take long for me to fall into the world of sex work. It was easy money at first, and in my mind, I thought it was the only option I had. I didn't care much for myself or my future then. I was numb, just going through the motions of each day, counting the hours until I could get some sleep, then wake up and do it all over again. I didn't know love, I didn't know peace, I didn't know worth, I just knew survival. People who did what I did were invisible, just bodies to be used, and I had long since accepted that fact. No one wanted to see me for who I was, and I didn't expect them to. But deep down, I longed for something more, something better. I wanted to believe that I could be loved, that I could feel whole. I craved something, even if I didn't fully know what it was. The men who came to me were often cruel, selfish, and harsh. Some were kind, but that kindness was always short-lived. They would pay, and they would leave. Some would promise me things they never intended to follow through on, offering false hopes of a different life. But I knew better than to believe them. I had learned not to trust anyone, and I had learned that love, for people like me, was a fairy tale. The world had made it clear to me that I didn't deserve love, and somewhere along the way, I believed it. I accepted it, even though it left a pit in my stomach every time I looked at myself in the mirror. By 21, I had moved to Los Angeles. The bright lights and glamour of the city promised something different, something bigger, more exciting. But when I arrived, I quickly realized that the city was just as empty as the world I had come from. Los Angeles was full of people, but it was also filled with loneliness. I still ended up in the same cycle, same desperation, same empty promises, and same lack of real connection. It was a Friday evening when it happened. Another grueling shift, another night of trying to numb myself with alcohol and cheap cigarettes. I was walking home, the sounds of the city bustling around me, the air thick with the weight of my thoughts. I felt a strange sensation creeping up my spine, something unexplainable. It was like the air itself had changed, like everything around me had shifted. For the first time in a long time, I felt something I couldn't identify. It wasn't fear exactly, but it wasn't peace either. It was a pulling, a calling that I couldn't ignore. I had been walking down the same street countless times before, but this time it felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, that someone was going to cross my path. But I didn't know what it was. My heart started to race as I walked faster, an overwhelming sense of urgency filling me. I had no idea where I was going. My feet seemed to take me towards some unknown destination, and as I turned the corner, I saw something I couldn't explain. There, in the middle of the street, standing like a beacon of light, was a man. I couldn't see his face clearly at first, but there was something about him. Something that felt like I had known him my whole life. His presence was overwhelming, a warmth that made me want to fall to my knees. But I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen. And as I stood there, his voice came to me, not loud, not forceful, but gentle. "My beloved child," he said. The words were soft, but they hit me like a wave. "You have been through much, but you are not forgotten." I felt something inside me stir, something I had buried for so long. Hope, love, something I didn't think was real. But in that moment, I felt it. I felt it deep in my bones. And for the first time in years, I began to cry, not from pain, but from something else. A longing I couldn't put into words. It was as though I had just met someone who truly saw me, who understood the depth of my hurt, my loneliness, and my despair. The man's voice came again. "You are not alone. You are not your mistakes. You are not what they say you are. You are loved, and you are worthy of redemption." I couldn't explain it. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew in that moment that something had changed. I felt peace for the first time in so long. The weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders, and though I didn't know where it was leading, I knew that I wasn't alone anymore. The man smiled at me, and with that smile, everything around me seemed to fade away. The street, the city, the noise, all of it melted into nothing. I was no longer in the world I knew. I was somewhere else, somewhere more real, more vivid than anything I had ever known. And that's when I saw it. The light, the warmth, a presence beyond anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just that I could feel the love. I could see it. I could almost touch it. And at the center of it all was the man. "Come," he said, extending his hand. "Come with me." And I didn't hesitate. I reached out, and as soon as my hand touched his, everything changed again. I felt myself being pulled into a realm of light, a realm of peace, and I knew, though I didn't know how, that this was where I was meant to be. The air was different here, clear and vibrant. There was no pain, no judgment, just an overwhelming sense of belonging, as if I had found the place I had been searching for my entire life. I was no longer the girl on the streets, no longer the girl who had spent so many nights trying to escape from herself. In this place, I was seen. I was loved. "Do not be afraid, my beloved child," the man said again. "I have a purpose for you." The man's words were not just comforting, they were powerful, full of authority and truth. But even more than that, they were filled with love. But just as I began to feel safe in his presence, just as I thought that maybe, just maybe, everything would be different, the warmth around me shifted. It was still bright, but there was something darker now, something I couldn't see but I could feel. It felt cold, it felt distant. And I knew deep in my soul that I was about to witness something that would change everything. I had no idea what was coming next. But I was about to see something that would open my eyes to the truth I had been running from for so long. As I stood there, trembling in his presence, I could sense the shift in the air around me. The world seemed to blur at the edges, and for a moment, I felt myself slipping between two realities, the one I had known and this new, inexplicable realm of light and peace. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked into his eyes. There was something so deep, so unshakably kind about the way he looked at me, and I felt as though I could stay there forever, caught in that gaze of unconditional love. But then, something changed. The atmosphere around me began to thicken, the light dimming ever so slightly. A faint tremor ran through me as the man, Jesus, as I would later come to understand, began to speak again, his voice soft but unwavering. "My child, your path has been dark, filled with confusion and pain, but there is always a way out, a way to find your true self." His words were gentle, but they carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. I had heard these words before, in whispers, in fleeting thoughts, in desperate prayers I had barely understood, but now, in his presence, they felt different. They felt true. And as he spoke, I couldn't help but feel a deep stirring within me, as though something in my soul was awakening, something I had forgotten existed. I wanted to fall to my knees before him, but I couldn't. There was something in the air that held me upright, something invisible but undeniable. I stood there, rooted, unable to look away from him. "I know your heart," he continued. "I know the battles you have fought. I know your pain, your shame, your loneliness. But you are not defined by those things. You are defined by who you were created to be." His words hit me like a flood, sweeping over me in waves. The weight of my choices, the choices that had dragged me through years of darkness, pressed down on me. I had always believed that I was nothing more than a product of my circumstances, that my worth was determined by the work I did and the life I led. I had told myself that I was beyond saving, beyond redemption. But as he spoke, I felt something stir deep within me, a flicker of hope. "Why me?" I found myself asking, my voice shaking with emotion. "Why would you care about someone like me?" His eyes softened, and the warmth in his gaze deepened. "Because I love you, Mia. I love you with a love that is beyond your understanding. You are precious to me." His words were so simple, yet they held an unimaginable depth. The idea that I, a woman who had sold her body for years, a woman who had nothing but pain and regret to offer, was loved by the creator of the universe, it was almost too much for me to comprehend. And yet, as he spoke, I felt the truth of it settle deep within my heart. But just as I was beginning to find comfort in his words, something began to change again. The warmth that had enveloped me seemed to dissipate, replaced by an eerie chill that ran through my bones. My breath caught in my throat as the atmosphere around me darkened. The light seemed to recede, pulling back into the distance as a sense of dread began to creep over me. Jesus, too, seemed to sense the change. He looked at me with an expression that was both sorrowful and resolute, and he spoke once more. "Come with me, Mia. There is something you must see." Before I could respond, the ground beneath my feet seemed to shift, and I felt myself being pulled forward, unable to resist. The world around me dissolved into darkness, and I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of fear that I could not shake. My heart raced in my chest, my thoughts a whirlwind of confusion. I wanted to ask what was happening, to beg for answers, but my voice caught in my throat. I felt as though I was falling through space, through time itself, into an abyss that I couldn't escape. The fear was suffocating, and the darkness seemed to close in on me, relentless and unforgiving. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. I found myself standing in a place unlike anything I had ever imagined. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of smoke and sulfur. The ground beneath me was rough and uneven, and I could hear distant screams echoing around me, agonizing, tortured cries that sent a chill of terror through my body. This place, this realm, was not of this world. It was something far worse. I turned to Jesus, my heart pounding, my breath shallow. "Where are we?" My voice was a whisper, barely audible. He looked at me, his expression solemn. "This, Mia, is the reality of hell." The words struck me like a blow to the chest. Hell. The very word sent waves of dread through my body, and I wanted to look away, to escape. But I couldn't. Something held me there, something that I couldn't explain, and as much as I tried to pull away, I found myself rooted in place. Jesus stepped forward, and I followed, my eyes wide with terror. Around us, I saw things, horrible things I couldn't comprehend at first. Souls, twisted and broken, writhing in torment. Their faces were distorted with pain, their bodies burned and scarred. Some were bound, chained to the ground. Others were consumed by flames, while others simply wept, their cries of despair filling the air. The heat was unbearable, the flames licking at my skin, even though I was not physically burning. "Do you see this?" Jesus asked, his voice steady but full of sorrow. "This is the consequence of a life lived in selfishness, in hatred, in unforgiveness." My heart clenched in my chest as I watched the suffering around me. I could feel the anguish of these souls, the weight of their regret, the endless torment that awaited them. Some of them looked at me as I passed, their eyes hollow, their bodies broken. They reached out as though begging for mercy, but none came. They were lost. And as I looked at them, I couldn't help but feel the weight of my own choices that had led me down a path that could very easily have ended in this place. I felt a surge of guilt rise within me, but Jesus' voice interrupted my thoughts. "Mia," he said gently, "this is not your end. It is not too late for you to change. It is not too late to turn away from this darkness." His words were both a warning and a promise. A warning of the consequences of my actions, but a promise that it was not too late to find redemption. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that my story didn't have to end in despair, that I could find my way out of this darkness. But the weight of everything I had done, the choices I had made, the people I had hurt, hung heavy in the air around me. The realization hit me like a wave. I was no better than the souls I saw around me. My own selfishness, my own choices had brought me to this place. But Jesus' presence, the warmth I had felt earlier, never left. "Come," he said once again, offering his hand to me. "It is not too late." I hesitated for a moment, my heart in turmoil. But then I reached out, my hand trembling as I took his. And in that moment, everything changed. The moment I touched Jesus' hand, everything around me seemed to melt away, like I had stepped through some invisible barrier that separated two worlds. The unbearable heat, the screams, the sight of those tormented souls, they all faded as if I had never seen them at all. For an instant, I felt like I was floating in a vast emptiness, weightless and lost. The air felt thick with sorrow and regret, but there was also something else, something that felt familiar yet distant. But then, as quickly as it had come, the darkness returned. This time, it was different. I wasn't standing in the midst of torment. Instead, I was being shown something deeper, something that made my heart ache with an unexplainable pain. It was as though I was being led on a journey to witness the consequences of a life lived in the absence of light. The air around me began to shift, and I found myself standing before a vast, desolate wasteland. It stretched as far as the eye could see, barren and empty. There were no people here, no cries or wails of suffering, just the eerie silence that seemed to echo through my very bones. Jesus was beside me, his presence so strong I could feel it pulling me forward, urging me to follow. His gaze was focused, his steps sure, as if he had been here before. I followed, though every step felt heavy, like I was walking through thick mud. My legs were unsteady, my body trembling, but I didn't dare stop. There was a purpose here, something I couldn't yet grasp, but I felt I was meant to understand. As we walked through the wasteland, I began to see them, souls, lost and wandering. They moved like shadows, barely more than ghosts of what they once were. Some were hunched over, their faces hidden. Others were standing motionless, staring into the void. There was no joy, no peace, not even a glimmer of hope. Just a never-ending emptiness that swallowed them whole. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask why they were here, why they were trapped in this place. But no words came. Jesus didn't speak either. He just walked ahead, and I followed, my heart sinking with each passing step. We came to a clearing. There, in the center, stood a massive structure, a wall of jagged rock, dark and imposing. I felt the weight of its presence even before I saw it. It felt like a barrier, something that could never be crossed, something that separated those who had gone too far from those who still had a chance. Jesus stopped in front of the wall and turned to face me. His eyes were filled with a deep sorrow, but also with a tenderness that made my heart ache. "This is the final place," he said softly. "Beyond this wall, there is no return. There is no hope. There is only darkness, eternal and unyielding." I felt my breath catch in my throat as I looked at the wall. Something deep inside me knew that this was the ultimate consequence of a life lived in selfishness, in unforgiveness, in the pursuit of only personal gain. And I could feel the weight of my own decisions pressing in on me, decisions that had led me down a path I hadn't fully understood until now. "Many souls have crossed this line," Jesus continued, his voice steady but heavy. "They have lived their lives in a way that cut them off from my love, and now they are lost. They cannot come back." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I wanted to understand, but I didn't know how. I wanted to ask him how someone could end up here, how anyone could make the choices that led them to such a place. Jesus reached out and gently placed his hand on my shoulder, guiding me to the edge of the wall. As I stood there, I could feel something deep within me shifting. There was no condemnation in his touch, no anger in his voice, just love. A love that I couldn't fully comprehend, but that I could feel deep within my soul. "You have seen the consequences of life lived in darkness," he said quietly, "but there is always a way out. It is never too late for redemption." I nodded, though my heart was filled with so many emotions, fear, confusion, sorrow, but there was also something else, a flicker of hope, a glimmer of understanding. He was showing me the path, but he was also showing me that it was not too late to turn back. Not too late to choose a different way. As we turned to leave the wall behind, I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but the images of the lost souls lingered in my mind. I couldn't forget them. I couldn't forget the way they looked, so broken, so hopeless. It haunted me, their eyes pleading for a chance they would never have. And as we walked, I couldn't help but feel a deep sorrow for them, a sorrow that matched the sorrow in Jesus' eyes. But there was something else too. Something stronger. It was a sense of urgency. I had to change. I had to find a way out of the cycle I was in. I had to stop living for myself and start living for something greater. Jesus had shown me the reality of hell, but he had also shown me something else, the possibility of redemption, the promise of grace, the hope that there was always a way back. As we continued walking, I began to understand. I began to see that the darkness I had been living in wasn't my end. I still had time to make a choice, to turn my life around. And in that moment, I knew I had to. I couldn't continue living as I had before. Not after everything I had seen. I awoke with a violent gasp, my body jerking upright as though I had been yanked from some deep, suffocating pit. My eyes snapped open, but I couldn't immediately make sense of my surroundings. For a moment, I thought I was still in that forsaken place, lost in the darkness of the world I had just witnessed. But the sharp sting of reality soon set in, the weight of the world around me grounding me back into the now. I was lying on the floor of my small apartment in Los Angeles, the same dingy place I'd come to call home after the move from Thailand. The same place where I'd tried to escape my past, but never really succeeded. I could still feel the residue of the shift I had just experienced, the faint warmth of Jesus' presence lingering on my skin like an echo I couldn't shake. I didn't know how much time had passed since I had returned to my body. The clock on the wall read 2:35 a.m., but it felt like a lifetime had slipped by in those moments I spent with Jesus. The weight of the realization that he had shown me the reality of hell crashed over me again, and my breath hitched in my throat. My heart pounded as I replayed the images in my mind. The hopelessness, the torment, the screams of those who had crossed the line and were now lost forever. I stumbled to my feet, shaking uncontrollably, my hands pressing into the cold wall for support. I was no stranger to hardship, but nothing had prepared me for the profound depth of what I had witnessed. I had always known a part of me was missing, that the life I had chosen was just a hollow shell of what I truly longed for. But now, with Jesus' words ringing in my ears, I understood with a clarity that was almost unbearable. I had been living in darkness. I had been making choices that kept me trapped in desperation, self-hatred, and numbness. My choices had been driven by fear, by the need for survival, by the hope that love and acceptance could be found in all the wrong places. And as I stood there, still trembling from the shock of my experience, I realized how far down the path I had gone. In my mind, I saw the faces of those I had hurt along the way. The clients who used me, the people I had abandoned, the broken pieces of my family that I had turned my back on. I had convinced myself that I had no choice, that I was stuck in a system that controlled me, that this was all I was ever going to be. But Jesus had shown me something more, something greater. He had shown me a way out. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed with grief for all the pain I had caused. I felt a deep sorrow, not just for the lost souls I had witnessed in hell, but for the person I had become. How had I allowed myself to get here? To live a life where love seemed so distant, where I had let my body become a commodity, a mere vessel for the emptiness I felt inside? But even as the weight of my past crushed me, I could hear Jesus' words, soft but firm, whispering through my mind, "It's not too late. It's never too late to turn back." I felt his love wash over me again like a balm to my battered soul. I had been lost, but I was not beyond redemption. I could still choose differently. I could still live a life that wasn't defined by my mistakes, my fears, or my past. There was hope. There was grace. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, as if exhaling all the shame and guilt I had carried for so long. In that moment, I knew that I had been given a choice, an opportunity to change, to leave behind the darkness and walk toward the light. But it wasn't going to be easy. I wasn't just going to wake up one day and suddenly be free. The journey ahead would be long, and I would have to fight every day to stay on the path that Jesus had shown me. But I wasn't alone anymore. As I sat there on the floor, my tears falling freely now, I whispered a prayer, a simple, desperate plea for help. Jesus, I don't know how to change, but I want to. I want to be free. I want to know love, real love, not the kind I've been running after my whole life. Please help me. Show me the way. I sat there for what felt like hours, just letting the silence wash over me. And then, slowly, as if he was answering my prayer, I felt a warmth in my chest, a lightness, a peace that had been absent for so long. It was as though I could feel Jesus' presence beside me, his hand on my shoulder, reassuring me that I was not alone. I had seen the reality of hell, and I had seen the reality of grace. I had witnessed the consequences of living without love, but I had also witnessed the power of redemption. It was like a door had opened, and I had stepped through it. The world seemed different now, as though everything was bathed in a new light. The same world that had felt dark and oppressive now felt full of possibility. But I also knew that the road ahead would be difficult. I couldn't pretend that everything would change overnight. My past would always be there, lurking in the shadows, reminding me of the life I had lived. I would have to face my demons, confront the hurt I had caused, and work through the layers of pain and shame that had built up over the years. But I also knew that I had a choice now, a choice to walk away from that past and live a new life, a life of love, forgiveness, and purpose. I stood up slowly, my legs still shaky, but stronger than they had ever been. As I looked around my small apartment, I felt something shift within me. This wasn't just a place to crash after a night of work. This could be the place where I started over. I didn't have to be the person I was yesterday. As I moved toward the window and gazed out at the city below, I made a vow to myself. I would change. I didn't know how, and I didn't know what that path would look like, but I would find my way, and I would no longer live for myself. I would live for him. To be continued. When I opened my eyes again, I could feel the weight of the world pressing down on me once more. But this time, it felt different. My body still ached, my muscles still trembled, but the heaviness that had consumed me for so long had lifted, even if just for a moment. I took in a long, slow breath, and for the first time in what felt like years, I exhaled without the weight of guilt and shame crushing my chest. I was still in the same place, the same small apartment in Los Angeles. The flickering lights from the street outside filtered through the blinds. The familiar hum of the city's nightlife could be heard, distant yet ever present. It was the same world I had left behind, but now it felt as if I was seeing it through a new lens, clearer, sharper, full of untapped possibility. I got to my feet, my head still spinning from everything I had seen, everything I had felt. The encounter with Jesus, the way he looked at me with such profound love and understanding, the weight of hell that I had witnessed, it was all too much to process in one moment. But it was also clear, so very clear, that I had been given a second chance, a chance that most people never get. And I couldn't waste it. There was no more time to waste. The overwhelming sense of peace that had settled in my chest was not fleeting. It felt permanent. As I stood there in the center of my apartment, I could almost feel the presence of angels, as if the entire universe had shifted in my favor. It was as if heaven itself was embracing me, urging me to take this next step in my life. But there was still so much I needed to face. I had to confront the reality of what I had done, the decisions I had made, the people I had hurt. I had to confront the lie I had lived, the lie that told me I had no worth, that love was something I could only find in fleeting moments of connection that came with a price. I had convinced myself that I was too far gone, that my past had already sealed my fate. But Jesus had shown me the truth. It wasn't too late. It had never been too late. I could change. I didn't know what that looked like yet. I didn't know how to walk away from everything I had known for so long. But I had Jesus' promise now. He had shown me the way, and though it would be difficult, though it would take every ounce of strength I had left, I was ready to follow him. I sank to my knees in the center of the room, my eyes closing as I whispered the words that had been building up in my soul ever since I returned to my body. Jesus, help me. Show me how to live. Show me how to love. I don't want to live in darkness anymore. I want to live for you. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something shift deep inside me. It was subtle, but it was there. An assurance that I was no longer walking alone, that I didn't have to do this on my own. I stood up and wiped away the few tears that had fallen. The tears were not of sorrow, but of freedom. I felt light, not because my problems were gone, but because I had the strength to face them now. I wasn't carrying them on my own. I had something greater now. I had hope. The world outside still seemed overwhelming. There were still so many people living in the darkness I had once inhabited. The streets of Los Angeles were filled with people who felt just as lost as I had. People who had given up on finding love, on finding hope. But now, I knew that I had a purpose. I had been given a mission, and that mission was to share the love I had encountered with others who were as broken as I once was. I took a deep breath and walked to the window. Looking out at the city lights, I felt a new sense of responsibility settle in my chest. I wasn't just living for myself anymore. I had a purpose, a calling to help those around me see the truth that they were loved, that they were not forgotten, that there was a way out of the darkness. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew I would face resistance, both from the world and from within myself. There would be days when I doubted, days when I felt the weight of my past trying to pull me back into the cycle I had once lived. But I also knew that I had the strength to press on. I had a new heart now, one that had been touched by the love of Jesus. And no matter how hard things got, I was going to keep moving forward. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, no doubt. I would have to rebuild my life from the ground up, to repair the broken relationships I had abandoned, to make things right where I could. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had Jesus with me. And if Jesus could forgive me, then I could forgive myself. I took one more long look at the city below, then turned away, feeling a renewed sense of purpose in my soul. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a witness to the power of grace. I was living proof that no one was beyond redemption. I knew it wouldn't be an easy road, but I was ready for it. No matter what came next, I had a mission now, a new life, a new heart, a new purpose, and nothing would take that away from me. As the days passed, I found myself in a constant state of inner turmoil. The change inside me was real, and I knew that I had experienced something profound, something that had given me a new hope, a new chance to rebuild my life. But as the days turned into weeks, I soon realized that living this new life was not going to be as easy as I had imagined. The world I had left behind was still very much a part of me, and the people in it weren't going to simply accept the new me. The first time I spoke out about my transformation, I encountered skepticism and judgment. A few friends, people I had known from my old life, laughed at me. They mocked the idea of finding salvation, and they mocked the very idea of Jesus reaching out to someone like me. To them, I was still the same. A prostitute, a woman with no future, someone who had wasted her life. The change I had experienced was either a joke or a delusion. After all, how could someone like me, someone who had been through so much, someone who had lived a life of so many broken choices, actually change? But Jesus had told me, "Your past does not define you. I am the one who defines you now." I repeated those words to myself every day. I kept saying them over and over when the doubts crept in, but it was still hard. The judgment from others was like a constant weight on my shoulders. I began to question myself. Was I truly forgiven? Was this transformation real, or was it just an illusion, a momentary escape from the reality I still lived in? The resistance came not just from the people around me, but from within myself too. The guilt, the shame, the regret, all of those feelings tried to claw their way back into my heart, telling me I wasn't worthy of this new life. They tried to convince me that my past would always be with me, that no matter how much I changed, I would never be able to escape the darkness I had lived in for so long. But I couldn't give up. Not now. Not when I had felt Jesus' love so deeply. Not when I had seen the depths of hell and understood just how much I had been spared. No matter how hard it got, I couldn't let go of the truth I had found in him. I had been given a second chance, and I was determined to make the most of it. As I continued to navigate my new life, I began to meet others who were just as broken as I had been. They were people who felt trapped, people who believed there was no way out of the darkness they were in. Some were living on the streets, others in abusive relationships, others trapped in cycles of addiction or pain. I could see myself in them. So much of what they were going through mirrored my own struggles. But even as I tried to share the love and hope I had found, I encountered more resistance. I was told that I had no right to speak of redemption, that I was just a sinner trying to play the role of a savior. I had been so many things, and now that I was trying to change, I was met with suspicion. Who are you to tell us how to live? You've been where we are, they would say, and they were right. I had been where they were. I had been lost, trapped, and without hope. I had seen the worst in people and in myself, and yet Jesus had reached out to me. I couldn't deny that. I couldn't hide it, no matter how hard others tried to silence me. The hardest part of all was dealing with my own inner doubts. Some days I would wake up feeling strong in my faith, confident in my new purpose. But on other days, the weight of my past would bear down on me, and I'd feel like I was right back where I started. The feeling of being unworthy, of being less than everyone else, would sneak into my mind, and I'd wonder if this life, this new way of living, was really meant for someone like me. It was during these dark moments that I would remember the words Jesus had spoken to me. I would remember how he had shown me that no one, not even me, was beyond redemption. That no matter what my past looked like, no matter what I had done or where I had been, his love was greater than all of it. In those moments of doubt, I would close my eyes and pray. I would ask for strength, for guidance, for the courage to keep moving forward. And every time Jesus would answer me, not with condemnation, but with love. "Do not be afraid," he would say. "You are mine, you are forgiven, you are loved, and you have a purpose." It wasn't easy. The struggles were real. But with each passing day, I felt the burden of my past slowly lift. I began to see that the resistance I faced, both from others and from within myself, wasn't something I needed to fear. It was part of the journey. And it was through the struggle that I would find the strength to continue. I knew I couldn't change everyone's mind, and I couldn't force anyone to accept my transformation. But I also knew that my mission wasn't to convince people of anything. My mission was to live as a testimony of God's grace, to show others, through my actions and my words, that change was possible, that no one was ever beyond the reach of God's love. I was learning, slowly but surely, that my worth wasn't defined by the judgment of others. It wasn't defined by my past mistakes or the choices I had made. My worth was defined by Jesus, and that truth was stronger than any resistance I faced. So I kept going. I kept speaking, even when I felt alone. I kept helping others, even when I didn't feel equipped. And every time I did, I could see the light of hope begin to shine in their eyes. Maybe they weren't ready to change yet. Maybe they didn't believe that redemption was possible for them. But I knew that by sharing my story, by being vulnerable and open about my own brokenness, I was planting seeds. Seeds of hope, seeds of faith. And that, I believed, was the beginning of something beautiful. The weight of the past no longer crushed me. The memories of my former life, those dark and hopeless days, had begun to fade into the background. Not because I was trying to forget, but because I was now living a life so different that it didn't fit with the person I had once been. And yet, I could still hear the echoes of the old me, a whisper at times, reminding me of where I had come from. But I was no longer afraid of those echoes. They didn't define me anymore. Instead, I began to embrace the new person I was becoming. The transformation I had experienced through Jesus was something I could never deny, and it became the foundation of everything I did. The love, the grace, the peace I had found, they weren't just abstract concepts. They were real, tangible, and alive inside of me. And now I was determined to share that truth with others who were as broken as I had once been. I started by working with people who had been through similar struggles. People who had lived lives of addiction, trauma, loneliness, and pain. They were trapped in cycles of despair, just like I had been. And I could see it in their eyes, the same hopelessness I had carried for so many years. But I also saw something else, the same deep yearning for love and meaning that I had once held. And so I became a mentor, a guide, a friend to those who were lost. I didn't have all the answers, but I had Jesus, and that was enough. I shared my story with them, honestly, openly, without shame, because I knew that my story could be a beacon of hope. If Jesus could save someone like me, he could save anyone. That was the message I carried, the message I lived by. But the journey wasn't without its struggles. Though I had left behind the world of sex work and the darkness that came with it, I couldn't escape the memories. Sometimes, when I passed by places that reminded me of my old life, I'd feel a pang of guilt or sorrow. I'd remember the faces of the men, the feeling of being used, the emptiness that had filled my days. And in those moments, it was easy to question whether I was truly free. But each time I felt that tug on my heart, I would remind myself of what Jesus had said. "You are forgiven. You are free. Go and sin no more." It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but with each step I took away from my past, I felt more and more of his peace filling me. I was no longer living in the shadows of guilt and shame. I was living in the light of his love and grace. In my work with others, I began to see the power of forgiveness. People came to me with stories of regret, pain, and brokenness. And as they shared their hearts with me, I saw something beautiful happen. They began to believe in the possibility of change, just as I had. They began to see that their past didn't have to define their future, that they didn't have to be stuck in the cycles that had once seemed unbreakable. And together, we began to rebuild our lives, one step at a time. But the real breakthrough came when I started to see the world differently. I no longer saw people as objects or as means to an end. I no longer saw myself as unworthy of love or compassion. I began to understand that every person had inherent value, that every soul mattered to God. I could see beauty in the world that I had once overlooked, and I could see the potential for good in every person I met. I started volunteering at local shelters, offering my time to help those who were in need. I began to share the love of Jesus with anyone who would listen, whether through a kind word, a helping hand, or a simple prayer. I could feel his presence with me in every moment, guiding me, encouraging me, and reminding me of the purpose he had given me. And in those quiet moments, when I would sit alone in prayer, I would reflect on how far I had come. I thought about that night when I had encountered Jesus, when he had shown me the reality of hell and offered me the chance to change. I remembered the warmth of his embrace, the way he had spoken to me with such tenderness, and the overwhelming sense of love that had flooded my soul. Jesus had not only saved me from hell, but he had saved me from myself. He had given me a new purpose, a purpose that was no longer driven by desperation or fear, but by love and grace. And as I walked forward in that purpose, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I was never alone. His love would always be with me. But my journey wasn't over. I had only just begun to walk in the freedom he had given me. There were still people who needed to hear the message of redemption, still souls who were trapped in darkness, still hearts that were crying out for love. And I knew that I was called to be a light in that darkness. So I pressed on. I spoke out, not because I had all the answers, but because I had experienced the truth of Jesus in a way that I couldn't keep to myself. I shared my story, not to glorify my past, but to show others that no matter where they had been or what they had done, they could always turn to Jesus. They could always find healing, forgiveness, and a new beginning. I became a living testimony to the power of redemption. I wasn't perfect. I still had my struggles, my doubts, and my moments of weakness, but I knew that as long as I kept my eyes on Jesus, I could continue moving forward. I had found my purpose, and that purpose was to share the love of God with a broken world. And so I continue to live with passion and purpose, knowing that my life is no longer defined by my past, but by the grace of Jesus. He had taken me from the depths of hell and placed me on a path of light, and I would walk that path every day for the rest of my life. Because I knew now more than ever that no matter how far someone had fallen, there was always hope, there was always grace, and there was always Jesus, waiting to lift them up just as he had lifted me. If you're struggling, if you feel lost or broken, remember this: Jesus is waiting for you. His love is greater than anything you've done, and he is ready to forgive, heal, and transform your life. It's never too late to turn to him. Embrace his love, let it change you, and walk in the freedom that only he can give.